gentlemen, and firstly I'd like to wish you all a happy New Year and healthy one, and thank you all for turning out in such great numbers. It's hard to believe we are halfway through this present series of the Tipperary People and Places lecture series. Tonight we would like to welcome Tim Boland from Nenagh to us. Tim and Marie and I go back a long, long way. We first met Tim back in, was it 2002? Around that. Many years ago, yeah. Many years ago. And we all started out doing a course in UL. Marie and I finished the Masters, but Tim well passed us out by completing his PhD in 2009. So well done, Tim. And it is well that he's after publishing his book, Father Kenyon, the Reverend Priest. So on your behalf, I would like to welcome Tim tonight, and I'm sure he will have a very, very entertaining and informative lecture for us. So Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you all for coming. I hope you leave here tonight with some little bit of information about Father Kenyon. Father John Kenyon was born in Limerick, Old Tomegate, in the year 1812, on the 5th of May. Tomegate at that stage was on the outskirts of the city. He had a shannon behind him, and he had green fields in front of him. And he was one of 6 children. He came from a fairly affluent family, as all priests in those days did. Very few of them were from poorer class families. His father had a stoneworks, and he was worked on Sarsfield Bridge in Limerick, the ornamental stonework on that, from 1825 to 1830. That monumental worked there in Tomegate right up to the 1960s. His mother had a shop and a public house. Right beside him was a brewery, and there was a reasonable employment in the area. A lot of fishing would have gone on, and so on. As I said, John and Mary Kenyon had 6 children. John was the youngest. He was probably spoiled as a child, but he always gave his mother as the major influence in his life. He said that when he was young, a young boy, he was 7 or 8 years of age when his next sibling was born. When he was a young boy, his mother sent him out every evening with parcels of food to give to needy neighbours. She would have known, because she had a shop, she would have known who needed it. And she said to him, always remember, it's the ones that don't ask might be the ones most in need. He carried that with him right through life, and especially during famine. He was amazing in his generosity and his kindness. We reckon he died penniless because he gave away everything he had. And again, the kindness and the love of his mother, when he came to Templederry and ended up in Chapel House in Templederry, one of the paintings he had in his house was a painting of his mother. He had 5 other brothers and sisters in the family. 3 boys, 3 girls. I suppose a mark of the mother's piety and kindness, we actually hear very little about the father. He spoke a lot about his mother, but he rarely mentioned his father. A sign of her kindness was the fact that his brother, Patrick, also became a priest. His 3 sisters all became nuns. 2 of them in Sexton Street in Limerick, and 1 of them in the Mercy Order in Ballingarry. The only one that didn't become a priest didn't do too badly for himself either. He became an engineer. That was, quite an achievement in the early 1800s. John entered Maynooth in 1829, the year of Catholic emancipation. And again, the question is asked, why did he go to Maynooth? Because seminary had just been opened in Limerick. Maynooth at the time was the elitist college for priests. Most of the well-known priests we had over the years, Cardinal Cullen and so on, most of them would have gone through Maynooth. It was an entrance exam, and only the best got into Maynooth. John Kenyon went there in 1829. He was ordained in 1836. His first posting was a little area called Dura, just beside Ballingarry Castle in County Clare. Now, again, another unusual issue was the fact he was not ordained for Limerick Diocese, he was ordained for Killaloe Diocese. His first posting was just outside Ballingarry, there's called Dura, he had a few months there, and then he moved into Ennis. He got 3 years in Ennis and would have had a little bit of hassle with some of the local people. Again, we consider he was trying to do the best for people. He was moved in a little bit of controversy from Ennis by his Bishop, Dr. Kennedy, and he was moved to silver mines. He gave 3 years in silver mines, 1839 to 1842. And it was probably in silver mines that his nationalism and his patriotism began to blossom. First thing he got involved with was a Buy Irish campaign. And in the parish of Silver Mines at the Masses, he asked the people to take a pledge with him that over the next 6 months they would buy Irish products if they were equal to the imported one and if they were of equal value. That wasn't totally his idea. There was a campaign going on in Ireland as far back as that to buy Irish products. He also got involved in the voting pattern, and he reckoned that people should have a secret ballot. At the time, the tenant had to go in and vote in front of his landlord. He said that wasn't on, the tenants should have a secret ballot. Another issue he got involved with was the temperance movement. Father Mitchel was just after starting his crusade, and Kenyon became very much involved in the temperance movement. And it was through that temperance movement that he became known for his qualities as an orator. He addressed large meetings in Nenagh and a very large one in Ballingarry, which is near Australia. In 1842, he was transferred to Ballinaclough. Sorry, that was I forgot to change the first slide. That was his ordination picture. And I'll just tell you a little story about that ordination picture. When I was doing research on Kenyon, I discovered that the wonders of Google, after Googling down along for days on end, that a picture of Father Kenyon hung in a monastery in Ennistimon in County Clare. I went up to Ennistimon, found the Christian Brothers Monastery in Ennistimon. I didn't see much activity around it. Knocked at the door. There was a Chernobyl office on one side and there was a Barber's office on the other side. The brothers had long gone. But the kind lady in the Chernobyl office told me that there was a brother O'Mara, and he's down from Leo O'Mara, down from your inside, who had been there. He had been the last Christian brother in the monastery, and he occasionally comes back and he had a room there where he stayed. He was out in Chernobyl, and she said she'd contact him. So I didn't put a whole lot of heat in it anyway, but believe it or not, a few days later I got an email from Belarus from Brother O'Mara, and he said that he didn't know, he said he thought he remembered some painting of a priest hanging in the dining room. And he said he'd search for it when he came back. When he came back at Christmas, he contacted me and said, I found the painting out the back. It was dumped out the back. He said, I don't know what you want. And lo and behold, it was that painting. That painting was done in 1836 on his ordination. That was, instead of the photographs nowadays, he got a painting done then. And that painting hung in Chapel House in Ballingarry up to the time he died. How it got to his time is another story that I might tell you if we have time later on. But with his kindness anyway, the Christian Brothers donated that painting to the parish of Ballingarry. And when I launched the book over a year ago now, I got that painting back to the people of Ballingarry, and it's now, I won't say it's in private place in Ballingarry, it's hidden away someplace so that nobody can see it from anywhere. And they actually got a copy of it done, and the copy is hanging in the church. When he came to Ballingarry in 1842, got into a little quibble with his parish priest. The parish priest was Father Carey. It was the church in Ballingarry, it was an outlying church in Killeen, in the country area. And of course he was posted to the country area. And he said, no way. I'm not going out into the country. He insisted on staying in the village of Ballingarry. Believe it or not, his parish priest gave him his way, and his parish priest moved down to Killeen. Now, possibly the reason was there was a house to live in Killeen. There was no house in Ballingarry, he was living in Sarkis. I think he laid a marker for his parish priest, Father Carey, when he won that battle. And secondly, he insisted that the parish be divided, that he would have one half of the parish and Father Carey would have the other half. So he, all through his career with Father Carey, he denied he was the parish priest. He said, we're both administrators in the parish. Now, at that stage, he was only 30 years of age. Now, his arrival in Ballingarry coincided with the foundation of the nation by the Young Irelanders. Thomas Davis, John Blake Dillon, and Charles Gavin Duffy in 1842 established the nation, a paper that was probably one of the most successful newspapers ever published in Ireland, successful in all its aims. The idea was that it would promote the repeal party of Daniel O'Connell throughout the country, and that the information would get to the ordinary people in every part of the country. The paper was a phenomenal success, and it lifted the repeal. The repeal party of O'Connell had gone dead. O'Connell had achieved emancipation in 1829. But he had failed, through many revivals of his repeal organisation, he had failed to get any favours from the British government. The idea was that the nation would uplift the whole movement, and it did. It uplifted it so much that they made 1843 repeal year, and they had mass meetings around the country with Daniel O'Connell speaking. You know all about them, when he needed and when he cashed on, there was a lot of them around the country. The Young Irelanders were quite happy with O'Connell at that stage. They were trying to push him, I suppose, in their own direction. But as time went on, after 1843, the final meeting that was supposed to be held in Clontarf, final repeal meeting to be held in Clontarf, was banned by the government. They banned it because they feared violence, and Daniel O'Connell agreed straight away to ban it. That was probably the first little split that came, because a lot of the Young Irelanders said, no, we should have gone ahead. We should have, laid down the law, and we should have defied the British government. Whether they were right or wrong, we will never know. Daniel O'Connell was imprisoned after the repeal meetings. He spent a couple of months in jail. Now, in fairness to him, he wasn't in solitary confinement. He was in Richmond Prison in Dublin, and he was given the governor's house. The governor vacated the house while he was there. With him, he had a couple of his sons. One of his daughters, in fact, made a request that she could go and live with him in the prison. He enjoyed the situation, and I think they were basically glad when he was let out eventually. But the situation was deteriorating a little between the Young Ireland members and O'Connell. It probably came to a head in 1846, because in that year, 1846, the repeal meeting was held down in Kilrush, County Clare. Smith O'Brien, Charles O'Connell from Ennis, was a relation of Daniel O'Connell's, and Father John Kenyon were just in the crowd. The meeting went grand, they were on the same side, but O'Connell, in his final address, made a few comments about Young Ireland, saying that they were violent men, they were trying to promote violence, and so on. Kenyon, who could let fly when he wanted to and did on numerous occasions, stood up and made quite a strong speech on moral versus physical force. He told the people that nothing had ever been won anywhere. No freedom had ever been won by peaceful means. And that the English, the British in particular, would give nothing without a fight. He said he was not promoting force, but he wanted it in reserve, and he wanted it there as a threat. And he also went on to say that O'Connell was indirectly using force as a threat. O'Connell spoke about all the crowds he had, the hundreds of thousands of people he had, and the strength of them and so on. That he was kind of indirectly saying, I have a wonderful army behind me. And that was probably why the British banned the final meeting in Clontarf in 1843. Within a very short time of that meeting in Rush, the Young Irelanders left Daniel O'Connell's party, Repeat Party, Conciliation Hall. Conciliation Hall was the hall where the Repeat Party met on a weekly basis. It could hold 3,000 people. O'Connell decided that he would force the Young Irelanders' hand, possibly call their bluff, and he decided upon a group of peace resolutions, whereby they would all promise that under no circumstances would they ever resort to force. Now, Kenyon might have been one of the military side of Young Ireland, Thomas Francis Maher and a few more, but there was a lot of peace-minded people there, Charles Gavin, Duffy, William Smith, O'Brien, and so on. They could not agree with that. They said, we cannot say we rule anything out. So the Young Irelanders left the Repeal Party in 1846, July 1846. They spent 6 months, I suppose, in limbo. They, like a political party, I often think of maybe the Progressive Democrats when they broke away a few years back, You leave and then what you do? You've got to deliver. One of the instruments they used was John Kenyon. Now, John Kenyon, probably one of the few Young Irelanders who never wrote a book. He wrote 2 pamphlets. One was on that moral and physical force pamphlet about 20 pages. And here's in Ennis. He wrote one on the beauty and the need for churches in Christian world. But he was a wonderful letter writer. And his letters were published in The Nation almost on a weekly basis. Tipperary Vindicator, all even the Nenagh could not ignore him. Kenyon began to write letters castigating O'Connell. He was probably O'Connell's greatest enemy in Young Ireland. One of the letters he wrote had the following in it. O'Connell has guided us for 50 years. Whither has he guided us? And where has he left us? We've been guided, step by step, self-hoodwinked to such an abyss of physical and moral misery, to such a condition of helpless and hopeless degradation as no race of mankind has ever plunged in since creation. We are a nation of beggars, mean, shameless and lying beggars, and this is where O'Connell has left us. The Irish Confederation, which was the organisation of the Young Irelanders, eventually got underway in January 1847. O'Connell died in May of that year, on his way to see the Pope. When he died, the writers and members of the Young Ireland Party, who were actually in almost total control of the Nation newspaper, there was very little input from the Repeat from Daniel O'Connell's side. It was almost totally Young Ireland. They decided to put black borders on the Nation newspaper from about the end of May on, to get the news of O'Connell's death. And we decided to make arrangements about attending the funeral and or Saturday and so on, and O'Connell died. Kenyon got totally angry. He said, how could you? He said, a month ago he was the greatest enemy that you had. And now you're talking about what a wonderful guy he was. Probably typical Irish, Lord John Kenyon. He said it was a disgrace. And he went and wrote a letter, first of all to the Irish Confederation, and I suppose after that then, he sent the same letter, almost word for word, to the Nation. Charles Gavin Duffy was the editor of the Nation, John Mitchel was assistant editor. On Mitchel's insistence, Charles Ballingarry published the letter. And I suppose we say now, the internet, the whole lot, it went viral. English papers, everybody covered it. Kenyon got a dreadful bashing over the letter. This is a small piece from that letter. Mr. O'Connell's debt, in my deliberate opinion, has been no loss whatsoever to the Irish nation. On the contrary, I think that Mr. O'Connell has been doing before his death, and was likely to continue doing so long as he might live, very grievous injury to Ireland. So that I count his death rather a gain than a loss for this country. He was the vaunted leader, the prime mover, the life and soul of the system of policy so servile and despotic, so hollow and corrupt, that the organs of the government to which it hampered laughed it to scorn. So the man was dead, and normally we don't talk about it today, but Kenyon had that to say, and an awful lot. The letter went on to about 3 pages. And he did with a lot of things like the famine, which was raging at the time. There had been a change of government in 1845. O'Connell's party had supported the Peel. When the change of government came, they jumped sides and supported the Whigs. And John Russell did very little for Ireland during the time. Peel had done quite a bit, and some of the young Ireland members were quite upset that O'Connell would continue to support John Russell's administration. That actually wasn't quite the end of the O'Connell debate. O'Connell's body was not brought back until August of 1847. His burial was the day before the general election. His son John, now by the way, at that stage, some people stood for Parliament in a number of constituencies or a number of areas, 32 and there was a lot of members of the O'Connell family. After Catholic emancipation, there was 7 members of the O'Connell family elected to Parliament. There had been very few Catholics, but there were 7 in one family. John O'Connell decided to stand in Limerick, and there was John O'Brien also standing in Limerick City. Kenyon was from Limerick, so he felt he had authority there, and Kenyon went and put a man up in opposition to him. It was probably quite a laugh, because his men got 37 votes, whereas John O'Connell and O'Brien got something like 300-400 each. That was quite a saga, and Kenyon would seem to have been at his absolute lowest. However, he was like a phoenix from the ashes. Within a month, there was a meeting of the Irish Confederation, and Kenyon was the guest speaker. And when Kenyon walked into the Irish Confederation, all his friends from Young Ireland, but we could probably say he had embarrassed him, his letter on O'Connell's death. He had embarrassed him to a certain extent at the Limerick election, but when he walked in, he got a standing ovation that lasted for 5 minutes. He was back on top again. And as we shall see, as he went on, he gained popularity again. On his own front, in 1847, now if I just backtrack there a little bit, sorry, I'll continue on. In 1847, he had a lot of exchanges with his parish priest again. His father Carey that he had insisted on defying. And in the summer of 1847, his bishop, Dr. Kennedy, with whom he never really got on, Dr. Kennedy suspended him and said he was going to investigate what was going on with himself and his parish priest. Now, unfortunately, there are many archives in the Killaloe diocese of what happened back in those days, because in 1902, the bishop moved residence, and apparently they destroyed or lost all the old archives. So there's nothing there to tell us what happened. But miraculously, Father Carey left Templeberry Parish and went to work in missions in England and never returned to Ireland. Father Kenyon was elected parish priest. And that little picture Father T and the parish priest of Ballingarry found that picture in the parochial house in Ballingarry, and written on it, it's only a tiny little one, written on the back of it was, "I have been elected parish priest of Ballingarry." It was from the day he arrived there, he was at Boland and succeeded. Again, if we go back to the scenario of political parties nowadays and so on, the Irish Confederation is going grand, but beginning in 1848, they started to argue and things started to rise amongst themselves. There were two sides emerging. John Mitchel, as I said, was assistant editor of Subeditor of the Nation. Charles Ballinaclough was the editor. Serious difficulties arose between them on editorial policy. Mitchel wanted to be far more militant, and he insisted on putting in an article in the Nation on the railways were being established around Ireland at the time. The first station opened in 1847, if I'm not mistaken, Templemore and so on. And he wrote an article on the railway stations and the wonderful use the railway system has to Ireland. And ended up by saying, brilliant system. Just blow up one piece of track and you stop the whole country in its tracks. In the beginning of 1848, things came to a head. Mitchel left the Irish Confederation, left the Nation newspaper, and set up his own paper, the United Irishmen. With him went Kenyon, James Clinton Lalor, and John Martin. A few others as well. Kenyon subscribed a letter to the very first edition of the United Irishmen. The paper was very revolutionary, very warlike, and after 5 or 6 issues, Mitchel was arrested. Especially for Mitchel, they introduced a new act in Parliament called the Treason Felony Act. Mitchel was found guilty and sentenced to be transported for 14 years. Now, any of you that haven't read or that have read the Jail Journal know how wonderful piece of writing it is. But he starts off the Jail Journal in the first chapter by saying, "At Claremont Bridge in Dublin this evening, there's a desolate family, a desolate house. My mother and my sisters had come up from the country to see me, possibly for the last time. My 5 little children, none of them old enough to realise what has befell them this evening. And above all, my wife. What would become of me?" Now, I needn't actually have worried what would become of him, because when Kenyon left Dublin a few days later, because he had some business to attend to, he brought Jenny Mitchel and her 5 children down to Templegarry with him. He had just built his new house at the time, Chapel House, and he kept them there until Christmas of that year. He acted as a complete guardian to Mrs. Mitchel. Now, she was very attractive looking, but I don't think that had anything to do with her. And again, as we moved on in 1852, she went out to Van Diemen's Land with her 5 children to join her husband, and John Kenyon travelled with her over to England and put her on the boat for Australia. And the London Times remarked that he was the only one of her husband's colleagues who bothered about her. And in fact, she expressed a wish on a couple of occasions that he might go out and work in Australia. When John Mitchel was gone, Kenyon straight away tried to move in to that position that Mitchel had. He met with Terence Benny McManus after the transportation, and they went to see Charles Gavin Duffy and said, "We have an Irish Confederation here that in a few months has gone into hundreds. Everybody is in it. Anybody that would come to a meeting, everybody's on the committee, everybody knows what's happening. This isn't work." So we need a much smaller organisation. Duffy agreed, and the Confederation was called together and disbanded, and a smaller group was established, which was intended to be secret. Now, an element of the support that Kenyon was getting at that stage, after what he had done the previous year, Himself and Thomas Francis Maher both received the maximum number of votes, and that helped him on to the executive. They surpassed Charles Gavin Duffy, William Smith O'Brien, and all the others prominent men. That was the beginning of 1848. Kenyon came home to Ballingarry, and I suppose they were heading towards war, towards some kind of rebellion. But the feeling was that it should hold it back until the autumn, until the potato crop would come around again, because we were right in the middle of the famine. There was a council of 300 which had been established, or they tried to establish it a few years previously. The Canada tried to establish it. And the Confederation, or the new league, now decided they would try to revive it, and held a few meetings around the country. One such meeting was held in Ballingarry, where about 10,000 people attended from all over North Tipperary. Kenyon gave quite a militant speech at that. He told the people to go home and arm themselves. Of course, news travelled to his bishop, and straight away he was suspended the second time in 12 months. Around the same time, Charles Gavin Duffy and a couple of the editors of the newspapers, we had John Martin, who had set up the Irish Felon. We had Richard Dalton Williams and Kevin O'Doherty, who had set up another newspaper, the Irishman. They were all arrested. On the 22nd of July, the Habeas Corpus Act was suspended. That meant that any one of them who would do any bit of military training, anything at all, could be arrested. So Smith O'Brien, Thomas Francis Maher, and a few others decided to head down the country and see what was happening. They were down to Wexford first, because I suppose in 1798 they expected support down there. There was really nothing happening. And they crossed over then to Kilkenny. And the Dr. O'Kane, one of the members of Young Ireland, was very prominent. And he had been promising all kinds of things, but actually nothing, he had very little in Kilkenny. They then headed down to Callan and into Tipperary. Started in Carrigan Shore, went from Carrigan Shore on up into Cashel. And the narratives of those Young Irelands afterwards spoke of the clergy coming out, stopping the people, telling the people not to get involved, don't get involved, keep away from the Young Ireland movement. Part of the reason probably being that they had broken away from O'Connell, and O'Connell was the hero of the Catholic Church. He had courted it in a big way, maybe to his own advantage. When in Cashel, Smith O'Brien sent some of his men up to Thurles to blow up the railway line. Again, following John Mitchel's advice that you hold everything. They moved on up then into Ballinaclough, and there's Charles J. Pickham wrote a wonderful narrative about Ballinaclough, and it probably sums up the whole Young Ireland rebellion, if we call it that. In Ballinaclough, when the Young Irelanders, Confederates, whatever you like to call them, came in, nothing was happening. There was 3 forges in the village, and straight away the blacksmiths started to make pikes. That wasn't a really wonderful sign. Pickham was only 18 or 19 at the time, and he spoke of his excitement and so on. They moved from there then on into Killinall, and in Killinall there was a police barracks with 2 or 3 policemen in it. And of course the policeman looked out the window and saw the lights outside, and straight away he surrendered. They felt they were on the pig's back, and that were really going well. That was their first success of the rebellion. They moved on then to Ballingarry. When in Ballingarry, William Smith O'Brien sent Thomas Cantwell over to Ballingarry, Father Kenyon, to find out what was happening. Kenyon didn't give him a very wonderful reception. Told him rebellion was useless, could achieve nothing. He went back, and then O'Brien sent forth to Ballingarry his heavyweights, I suppose, Thomas Francis Maher, John Blake Dillon, who was one of the founders of the nation, and who Kenyon crossed a little bit later in life in an eviction into Tipperary, and a guy called Maurice Lane. Now, Maurice Lane was an unusual Confederate. He was a grandnephew of Daniel O'Connell's. He was born in Tralee, and he was very much a repealer. When Daniel O'Connell died in 1847, 2 years after a year and a half after the Young Irelanders had left, he was offered a position, government position, by his colleagues, by John O'Connell, Daniel O'Connell's son. Straight away, he saw what the Young Irelanders had been saying. All you guys, you're taking jobs from the British, and if you take jobs from them, then they own you. Kenyon called it place hunting. So straight away Lane felt that, yes, these people have been talking sense, so he changed sides and joined the Confederates. Lane was in Ballingarry. After the rebellion, he was arrested, but he was found not guilty. And he went back and became sub-editor, assistant editor of the Nation with Charles Gavin Duffy. And that same man, I'm just skipping ahead a bit now, just in case I forget it later, he came to Torres in 1854 and decided to establish a Tipperary newspaper called the Tipperary Leader. He sent out a prospectus for the paper, and the first issue was to be published on the day that he died from typhus. And he is buried here in Torres in St. Mary's Cemetery. When the three lads came to Ballingarry, Kenyon said, no, I am not calling out any men on my refuge. The truth was, nobody was trained, nobody had any weapons, nobody had anything. He said there is no need for heedless bloodshed. He spoke of the struggle as being a bootless struggle. Now, a couple of years later, Thomas Francis Maher said that it wasn't a battle at all. It was just a skirmish. It meant nothing. Afterwards, it transpired that Kenyon's agreement with his bishop, which reinstalled him as parish priest of Ballingarry a few weeks previously, part of that agreement had stated that yes, he could become involved in a rebellion if there was a reasonable chance of success, but not otherwise. Now, apparently, I am any theologian, but apparently that is Catholic teaching, that wars are justified if there's a chance of success, not if there is no chance. Kenyon did not become involved, and that evening he wrote in the parish register, baptism register in Ballingarry, "This day I've heard of a rebellion in Ballingarry led by William Smith. May God speed it." The guys in Ballingarry heard that there was a battalion of British soldiers under Captain Shant coming from Callan. So they moved out from Ballingarry, out into the commons, and they met that battalion at William McCormick's house. The battalion took refuge in the house, holding the children as hostages. The Confederates surrounded the house. They didn't really know what to do. Terence Ballinaclough, a very close friend of Kenyon's, saw a cartload of hay, and he said, "Let's burn them out." But William Smith O'Brien refused. Nothing became of the rebellion, but 2 men were killed, mainly by accidental gunfire. The rebellion was a total and utter failure, and most commentators afterwards, and most people who were there, blame on William Smith O'Brien. They said he was too gentle a leader. After that skirmish, the men went on the run. There's a few of them: Thomas Francis Maher, Maurice Lane, that we've spoken of, and a couple of others arrested in Holy Cross on the 12th of August. William Smith O'Brien was arrested here in Torres, as he tried to board a train. A railway worker called Hume spotted him, contacted the police, and Smith O'Brien was arrested. He said he was a dreadful wreck at the time. He was totally depleted. Hume would have got a reward of £500. The men were tried in Clonmel. The leaders were all sentenced to death, but that was reduced to transportation. Within 6 years, by 1854, every one of them had either been freed or pardoned. The rebellion was totally and utterly over. What it did lead was total disillusion in Ireland. Because, again, we've got to remember, the famine was raging at the time. 1847, 48, the worst of the time. Now, I mentioned earlier on, John Kenyon's involvement in the famine. That is Chapel House at Ballingarry. Kenyon built that house through local labour in 1847 and the beginning of 1848. He employed all local people, paid for them, paid out of his own pocket. His father had died in early 47 and left him quite a lot of money, and he used all of that money to pay people. The house was a disaster architecturally. No two windows matched. Floors were up and down and in and out. The story was that he forgot to put in stairs and so on. But it worked fine, and as I said, that house was home to the Mitchel family for 6 months. Thomas Francis Maher also stayed there. Thomas Clark Luby. John York stayed there on numerous occasions. John Mitchel never stayed there. He had been a visitor to Ballingarry before the house was built, but he never stayed there. Kenyon also built a wall, which got him into serious trouble with the county council, because they said he had breached planning laws, which we would have expected existed in those days, and the wall was demolished. But he provided massive local labour. He was also a wonderful chairman of the Relief Committee, and his letters are really, really interesting as to writing to the Commission in Dublin that were held for aid. He left the famine, like John Mitchel, totally and utterly on the British government. He said that the climate was favourable for growth, the soil was productive, and the people industrious. Why were they allowed to starve? England plundered Ireland and treated our people in a manner disgraceful in the eyes of the world. The golden treasure of the fields was taken, and in its place a dole of pig's meal was supplied, and not even enough of that. And I think in a book published by Tim Coogan there just before Christmas, The Famine Plot, he really goes into that in a big way, totally and utterly blames the English government. Kenyon kept everything to the famine, and his colleague and friend Charles J. Kickham wrote a wonderful poem, Father John, about Kenyon. One of the verses says, "But your pale brow is now resting on your head, Father John. Dark sorrow stamps your features, weak and bland, Father John. And the binding teardrops rise to your sad and dreary eyes. You can only weep for suffering at no end, Father John." After the famine and after the failed rebellion, things were very quiet in Ireland, people were very depressed. And then in 1852, there was an attempt to get a tenant right movement, a tenant leave movement going. James Fintan Lalor had made an effort in 1847, and he held a meeting in Buddy Cross here, which wasn't well attended. This was probably a slight carry on, despite the fact by 1852 James Fintan Lalor was dead. Kenyon refused to get involved in the tenant right movement, saying that it wasn't a time when people were defeated and people were upset and so on. But that man behind, it was Father Croke at the time, then became Archbishop Croke of Cashel. Father Croke was based in Charleville, County Cork, and he wrote an open letter to Father Kenyon and published it in the newspaper. And that open letter asked Kenyon for his views on tenant right movement. And the first point he put to Kenyon was, he said, if a tenant has land and he does it up, surely some law has to be put into place whereby he will get some compensation for what he does to the land. Kenyon wrote back and he agreed. He said, yes, he said he should get compensated. But he said, how would you put a law into action? He said, the world is full of laws. He said, we have laws for everything and rules for everything. And he said, next year, he said, that rule will be out of date. He said, we'll have to bring in a new one. He said, we're full of the rules. He said, we should think of the man above. Think of God, he said. God created 10 rules, the 10 commandments. He said, he never had to change them. He never had to adapt them. And he said, those rules cover every aspect of the world that you could think of. And he said, don't start meddling with those rules until you can come up with some ones that are better. And he said, simplicity is the governing factor of all those rules that God made. Probe then went on and he spoke about security of tenure, and that if a tenant pays his rent, he should not, under any circumstances, be evicted from the land. Kenyon did not agree. He said, the landlord owns the land. It's his right. If he needs to take back the land, it's his right to take it back. He said, if that was the case, he said, if you have a house and you rent it to somebody, he said, are they in it forever? He said, anything you have, he said, it's a person that owns it. And he said, in general, he said, I have never seen anyone evicted for anything other than non-payment of rent. And he said, if you bring in a law like that, he said, people will stop paying rent and will start trying to use that law. He went on with a couple of other issues on the I think it, so we'll leave it. At that stage, the tenant movement joined up with a number of MPs in England and set up a group called the Catholic Defence Association. And they helped elect a number of members of Parliament. Kenyon condemned them. He said it's not going to work. And believe it or not, it was actually right, because two of the MPs, a man called Sadler and another man called Keogh, the minute they became members of Parliament, they took lucrative jobs for the British government. And that, of course, sided them with the British government. Kenyon, I suppose, was happy that his prophecy was right. And then he stayed very quiet for 2 years. So a few things went on. But of consequence around here, the next thing that he got involved in was in 1858, the Common Purpose. And guess who jumps up here? Same Mr. Keogh, who had been elected a member of Parliament for the Catholic Defence Association, making all kinds of pledges. Judge Keogh became known as. Judge Keogh condemned the Common Brothers to death for the murder of the land agent Ellis in Ballinaclough. They were executed in Nenagh, and there was absolute outcry, as well as we say national outcry. And all through the summer after their execution, people continued. Signatures were collected and so on. And in the end of August, a major meeting was held in Nenagh. Interesting day meeting was the O'Donoghue, who was MP for Tipperary and a bit of a lively guy as well, and John Kenyon. John Kenyon, of course, gloated in the fact that Keogh had been the judge. And John Kenyon proposed at that meeting that they should hang Keogh. He said, we're going to demand a pardon from the British government for the Cormac brothers and that they hang Keogh. Now, a lot of people get over about him, and the local papers, of course, had a field day. But some of the English papers said that what it actually did was it brought the whole thing to the public. Because probably outside of North Tipperary, nobody would have known that those men were executed. And then in 1910, bodies were exhumed from Nenagh jail and brought back here to Lalor. The papers, as I said, condemned Kenyon big time. And I'll just very quickly read for you a piece from the Nenagh Guardian, where they addressed John Kenyon very, very wrongly, because as you can see, they're cutting him to pieces. Then go home, John Kenyon, to your mountaineer retreat, and while seated in your luxurious chair with luscious fruits and sparkling wines before you, shut out from your view the ragged wretches whose labour and ignorance and crimes supply your pampered palate with the dainties set before you. And while your lofty genius burns the cobwebs that bind your freedom, hug that gold which the genius is implied in extracting from your unwilling miser, the starving peasant, the helpless widow, and the half-intelligent farmer. It was totally wrong opinion because he was so charitable, so wonderful to the people of Tunkadurry. I'll go more quickly now. 1862, the Fenians were established in 1858. Kenyon refused to get involved in them and always denied he was a member. But there was a little subgroup, and again we could think of organisations in Ireland in the last few years. There was a little subgroup of the Fenians called the Brotherhood of St. Patrick, and he became a very prominent member of that. So while he was a member of the Brotherhood of St. Patrick, he denied that he was a member of the Fenians. In 1862, Terence Belly McManus, who I've spoken of there a few times, died in America. He was actually buried in America, and then the Fenians decided it would be a good idea to bring him home. A great publicity stunt. So they brought him back, they brought him to Cove, and he was honoured in the Cathedral in Cove. They moved him on by rail, Limerick Junction, I suppose, on this rail to Dublin. When they arrived in Dublin, Cardinal Cullen, or he was only Archbishop Cullen at the time, refused to allow him into a church. He said, "You've had your religious service." So they put him in the Mechanics Institute, which has since become the deputy of James Stevens asked Thomas Clark Ruby to get Kenyon to give the oration at graveside. Kenyon willingly agreed and went to Dublin and met Stevens in Dublin. But for some reason Stevens wasn't happy with Kenyon's speech. He said it wasn't militant enough, it had gone too quiet. He wanted a complete show of militancy. So he took the job from Kenyon. Kenyon became quite aggrieved, and it was a very, very lively meeting of the committee. And at that meeting, Kenyon stormed out of the meeting saying, "You will have no funeral tomorrow. I will kidnap the body during the night." So much did the believers tread that they put an armed guard on the body for the night. He didn't carry out the threat, but the following day, the funeral took place. An American member of the American delegation gave this, was to give an oration at the graveside. The chief mourner was McManus' sister, and in the car with her was John Martin and John Kenyon. They were the chief mourners. When they got to Glasnevin Cemetery, it was late in the evening, there was a massive crowd there. A Father Lavelle from Dublin, another friend of Kenyon's, popped up and made a speech. So by the time it was a time for the American to give the proper oration, most of the people had left. Now, just very quickly, that's one on slavery. Kenyon was cast as a slave operating priest in Tipperary. He refused to condemn slavery. He didn't go as far as John Mitchel, but he refused to condemn slavery because, he said, it has never been condemned in Scripture. And he said, first of all, he said, let's get rid of the slavery out of Ireland. He said, we are slaves to the British. He said, everybody, every one of us are slaves. We're slaves to time, we're slaves to money, and so on. And like Mitchell, he said, a lot of the slaves in America and elsewhere are treated very well, and are probably better off than those who may not be in slavery. I leave that piece. That's a picture of the three Johns. John Mitchel, John Martin, and John Kenyon. Three best of friends. Mitchell and Martin, two Northern Presbyterians. John Kenyon, they a very Catholic priest. They were the closest of buddies. They became friendly through the Young Irelanders and the Irish Confederation. When Mitchell was transported to Van Diemen's Land, pardon was offered in 1854. He refused to accept the pardon from the British, and he escaped from Van Diemen's Land, went to Paris, and went to America. While he was in Paris, John Kenyon visited him 3 times. Kenyon got around. He used holiday every year in Kilkee, in the Inch, He was in Scotland a few times, and he was in Paris 3 times, which wasn't bad in those days. He visited him in 1860, 1864, and 1866. When he visited him in 1860 in Paris, he baptized one of Mitchel's daughters. They were Presbyterian, and I suppose she had been so impressed by Kenyon, that she wanted to become a Catholic, and he baptized her. And that entry is in the register in Ballingarry, the baptism of Mitchel's daughter. She became a nun. She died short time later. The three of them met, as I said, on 3 occasions in Paris. That picture was taken in 1866. That was the only, I suppose, before I came on those other pictures, that was the only image of Kenyon, the one with the hand face. And very probably that's the one that Charles J. Hickam used when writing the poem on Kenyon. But after Kenyon's death, that picture was sold through the nation. When they met in 1866, John Mitchel said afterwards, he said, "I fear Kenyon is looking bad. We shall never meet again on this side of life." He was right, because in 1869, John Kenyon died. On the 21st of March 1869, John Kenyon died at Chapel House. He was only 56 years of age. Looks much older there. We're told, very heavy smoker, and while I told you earlier on that he has a major boost to the temperance movement, he seems to have changed his policy the way through, and we have numerous references to heavy drinking and drunkenness and so on. So it's probably a rough lifestyle. Now, moving on, so I leave it. When he died, there were numerous tributes in it. I put on that one first from Charles Gavin Duffy. Charles Gavin Duffy never forgave John Kenyon for 1848. He was probably, as far as I could find, the only one who didn't forgive Kenyon. But he gave him a reasonable tribute. He said, "He was a man greatly but unevenly gifted. With more worldly wisdom, he might have been a Swift. With more spirituality and fidelity, he might perhaps have been a Savonarola." Savonarola was a Florentine Dominican of the 15th century who was executed with the Pope's permission. He was torn inside. But I'd like to finish on that's reasonably positive. I'd like to finish on a much more positive note from the man who knew him best, John Mitchel. John Mitchel said, "The wondrous intellect is quenched at last. The brightest, keenest mind, and the most genial and loving nature, the most complete model of manhood at its best, is passed away." Thank you.